Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Bolt Action Reloading. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking all about the new A-TIP match projectiles by Hornady. Stick around. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here and you'd like to see how I and the rest of you here make our group smaller, start now by subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell icon. That way you get notified when I post next week's video and you won't miss anything. Guys, in this week's episode, we're going to be covering primarily the 153 grain A-TIP match projectiles by Hornady. We have both of them on the table here. We're going to talk a little bit about why you might want one over the other, but our primary goal of this week's video is simply to see if these huge 153 grain A-TIP match projectiles are actually going to stabilize in our rifle. There's no point in going too deep into load development with these expensive projectiles if our rifle just can't handle them. So for today's video, 12 shots is all we plan on firing. However, we're going to be using two different rifles, both chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. Our first test platform is going to be our Ruger Precision Rifle, chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. This still has the stock barrel, though it's had quite a few rounds through it. It still has a 24-inch barrel, and we've done a little bit of measurement with these projectiles already, and the dimension certainly shows the wear to our barrel. The actual cartridge overall length in our RPR to get to the lands would actually be 2.971 inches. Certainly way over magazine length, actually by 100 thousandths. Our other test platform is going to be a Thompson Center compass, chambered again in 6.5 Creedmoor. This doesn't have very many rounds through it, and actually showing a cartridge overall length in that particular rifle of 2.953 inches. Both of these rifles actually have a 1 8 twist barrel. According to our box, 1 8 twist is going to be exactly what these projectiles need to stabilize. We're going to shoot 5 rounds through each just to make sure, and we're going to pull out some more projectiles just so we can get a good comparison of why you might pick these over another. I mentioned in the beginning that these are a little bit expensive. Retail price for these projectiles is going to be about 77 cents per projectile if you're buying by the 100. Might be slightly cheaper if you can find a coupon code, a sale, or buy in a 500 lot, which these are available in. There are several reasons to pick up these A-TIP projectiles. A-TIP stands for aluminum if you're not familiar. There are lots of fancy reasons to pick these up, but let's just go over a couple. Just reading the box, we're going to see these have a precision machined aluminum tip. If you're familiar with the Hornady line, this is very comparable to the 147, except instead of having a polymer tip, they actually have a machined aluminum tip. Our other comparison projectiles we're going to be using, we have on the table now, are the 147 grain ELD match, as well as the 150 grain Sierra hollow point boat tail. I did a video on the Sierra quite a while ago. If you'll see the box, you will notice it does require a 1 7/2 twist barrel, and they mean it. I shot a velocity string to my Ruger Precision Rifle, and unfortunately, it was very obvious that it was right on the edge of being able to stabilize, and some projectiles didn't. I didn't figure there was any reason to go any further, and so honestly, we haven't used any of the rest of those projectiles since shooting our velocity string. And we're not going to today, but we're going to talk about them. As far as ballistic coefficient goes, these 150 grain hollow point bow tail Match King projectiles by Sierra, part number 1755, as long as they're above 1,760 feet per second, they're claiming a G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.713. These are a little bit pricier than the Hornady 147s. The Hornady 147s are no slouch themselves. Not quite as high, but a little bit lower, and certainly don't require the 1 7/2 twist barrel that is required by the Sierras. We've actually had some fairly good luck with these 147s, and even shot well under 3/4 in MOA, pushing right around 2,760 feet per second without any pressure issues whatsoever. So as far as our rifle is concerned, this is kind of the gold standard by which we will compare things today. We're going to shoot one each of the 147s to get a velocity comparison, as well as to make sure that our rifles are somewhere close to on target before we shoot our single 5-shot group that we're going to shoot today. Hornady does currently have the data for these posted on their website, so if you're interested in that, I suggest to go download it, because as soon as they come out with the manual, it will disappear. The G1 ballistic coefficient on these 153 is a 0.704, so a little bit higher than the 147. But actually, as Hornady tends to do, if you're familiar with Hornady's load data, they do have it matched up with the load data for the 147. And so, depending on what powder you pick, they're claiming the max velocity that they have data for is only 2,650 feet per second. Now, as you see, we have the 135s on the table. The 135s, for their weight class, certainly have a wonderful G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.637, and Hornady has data all the way up to 2,850 feet per second, so a full 200 feet per second faster than the data for the 153 grain A-TIPs. Now, as we go along today, I'm not going to tell you not to try these 153 A-TIPs out, but you really have to have a good reason to, at least when we're talking 6.5 Creedmoor. As far as 6.5 Creedmoor is concerned, the 250 feet per second velocity advantage that the 135s have will certainly make them a compelling choice to shoot, and certainly would not have to worry whether these 135 grains would stabilize in our rifle. So before we go out and shoot a whole bunch of these, we're going to shoot these 153s, make sure that they stabilize, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about our plans moving forward. Talking about our reloading data for today, we're actually borrowing from something we've already done with these 147s. Since the 153 and the 147 are using the same velocity data on Hornady's website, I'm going to back it down just a little bit with what I've already shot with the 147. The max I've shot with the 147 of Reloader 16 is 43 grains, which, by the way, this is not published load data, so please use with caution and work up in your own rifle if you so choose to do so. Personally, I would recommend you starting out with Hornady's load data and going from there on your own. However, I have just a little bit of Reloader 16, and I've done a significant amount of work with it with the 147, and so I'm fairly comfortable with its usage in my rifle. So as far as today's load data, 42 grains of Reloader 16 is what we're going to use, a full grain lower than the 43 max that we've shot with it before. In fact, we're using different brass today. We're Hornady bullet, Hornady brass is what we're going to be shooting. So we're really not trying to shoot for groups necessarily, though it would be nice to shoot in one hole. What we're really looking for is just pure stabilization. Do we get any funny looking holes? Or give us any clues to why we would not want to move forward. Certainly, as expensive these are, we don't want to load up 25 or 50 of these rounds and find out that it was all a giant waste of time. So we're going to start off with 5 in each rifle just to see. Certainly the round count in our Thompson Center compass is a lot lower. However, I would certainly consider that to be a much lower quality rifle. But since it's available, we might as well give it a test. We've picked our charge weight. Our cartridge overall length is very important. We mentioned earlier our cartridge overall length in our RPR to the lands would be 2.971 inches. We really don't have as much bullet inside the case as I would like to, and we'd like to load them both to the same length to make sure they fit in both rifles. So the 2.951 cold to the lands in the Thompson Center compass is going to be our restricting dimension. Trying to keep it relatively close, we're going to actually move that to 2.940 inches. So these are actually going to fit in our Thompson Center compass magazine. However, these will be single feed in our Ruger precision rifle. Assuming we do another video on these, I'll probably give you a weight spread of the entire lot. But as you can see, I have my FX120i on the table, and we did weigh these out. The FX120i will give you to the 200th of a grain measurement. I'll post the weights on your screen if you're interested. Quite a few of these right around with 153.2 all the way to 153.26 range, or even 2.8. The 153.14 grains was our lowest weight, and our highest weight was the 153.38 grain projectile. Certainly not a huge swing, but if we eliminated those two, our extreme spread for 8 projectiles would have went down to less than 1/10 of a grain. These are the first 10 loaded sequentially, because that's how these are made. These are actually struck in the same die, and these are sequentially out of each machine. So just to give you guys a little idea, I'll put a comparison on there. We'll see the 147 on your left, the 153 A-tip in the middle, and on your right you'll see the 150 grain hollow point bowtail by Sierra, just so you can see the comparison between the 3 projectiles. The primers we're going to be using for today's testing is nothing fancy. We're just using some Federal 210 large rifle primers. Obviously our powders are Reloader 16, 42 grains of what we're loading across the board, including our 247 grain projectiles that we're going to be loading. We know that's a safe charge, so that's what we're going to be loading for it. Now you can notice a whole bunch of other stuff on the tables. Typically, I do most of my bullet seating with a ultramicrometer seating die by Forrester when it comes to 6.5 Creedmoor. However, I'll put some shots on your screen and you can judge for yourself. I really was not happy at all with the way that the 153s fit in the Forrester seating stem. So you'll notice another seating stem on the table. The part number is 397138. If you're interested in picking that up, I'll put a link to it below on Amazon, as well as in case you don't have one already. If you're going to get a Hornady seating stem, you're going to need the Hornady bullet seating die to use the seating stem. You're also going to notice I have the ultramicrometer adjustment on here. That's only another $28 add, and it can actually be screwed onto any Hornady seating die, so it's a great addition to any of the dies. And for $28 being able to add that micrometer function, it certainly has Forrester beat out for price. And a lot of other things we could argue about. But to use a seating stem, both the 135 and 153 fit marvelously in that seating stem, and so that's why I picked it up. We're going to load these up real quick, go out to the range, shoot a group with each rifle, see if these things group at all, but mostly just see if they stabilize. That's the primary use for today's test. Just so you guys know, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why you would pick the 135 or the 153 when we get back from the range, so stick around for that. We're going to talk a little bit more some ballistic calculations with these 2 projectiles to give you an idea why you might want to pick them up. We'll go out to the range real quick, see how these do, come back and talk a little bit more about these projectiles. And unfortunately, somehow our card got corrupted, and that is all the shooting we have for today. Believe me, the next group that we were shooting, I really wanted to show you guys as we shot it, but I guess the cards just didn't go in our favor this week. The Thompson Center compass, we shot just the one 5-shot group. It was almost a case of what could go wrong did go wrong. Our initial shot on the 147, somehow the chronograph battery died, and so we missed the first shot with the 147 to get the reference velocity that we were hoping to get, and I didn't have a spare with me. So we don't know what the initial velocity was for the 147 in the Thompson Center compass. The 5 shots with the loader 16 of these 153 A-TIPs, our 5 shots averaged 2,634 feet per second. Our standard deviation was 6.1 with an extreme spread of 15, but unfortunately we ended up with a 1.703 MOA group. Aside from losing the range footing, our Ruger precision rifle gave us much more interesting data today. Our reference velocity that we got was 2722 feet per second. If you stroll back to the video where we actually tested this combination before, that velocity had repeated at 2706 feet per second. The 5-shot string we shot with that was a extreme spread of 10 and a standard deviation of 4.5. However, that was liable brass with a lower case volume with 147, so we would have expected slightly lower than the 2,706 feet per second. Though, however, today, 2722 feet per second was what our first shot went. Keep in mind that's cold barrel, so if we'd have shot more than one of those, we might have got a slightly different velocity. But moving right on to the A-TIPs, that's what we're really here for today. I really wish we could have shown you the shooting as we did it. You'll see soon enough. Our average velocity with our Ruger precision rifle that had 2 inches longer barrel than our Thompson Center compass averaged 2667 feet per second, a standard deviation of 7.1 with an extreme spread of 18. And if you want to go 4-shot group, we had a .312 MOA group, or if you want to include the last shot, which yes, it was the last shot, was 7.12 MOA group. Not really one to make excuses, but I was staring at a 1-hole group down at the end there when I pulled the trigger on the last shot, so whether that was me or not, but either way, I guess I'll take it. We really hadn't done any extensive testing, and being able to get 4 shots inside in basically 1 hole almost makes me sound like I'm working for Hornady's marketing department. I assure you, I am not. As far as our answer to whether or not we can stabilize the bullet in this rifle, I'm pretty sure it's obvious. The 1-in-8 twist will stabilize these 153s with no problem whatsoever. You know, the velocity we hit is over what Hornady's data actually takes us to. I'll put the brass on the screen so you can take a look. There's really no pressure signs on here that makes me concerned in any way, shape, or form. For the workup we did on this, we'd taken it a full grain higher for the 147s. The big surprise for me is that honestly, under the same identical weight charges that the 147s had a higher velocity than these 153s. If anything, I would have expected under essentially the same overall length, same powder charge exactly underneath them, that we would have seen a higher velocity for those 153s and certainly more pressure signs, but that was not the case today. Not sure exactly why that is, but if we test more on the channel here, I'm sure that we will get more information. If you guys caught last week's video, you know that I'm looking at getting a new barrel for the Ruger precision rifle, and one of the reasons why I wanted to run this test before we changed the barrel on there was to understand what kind of twist weight we really needed. Like we'd said earlier in the video, these 150 grain Sierras do require that 7.5 twist barrel. However, it seems these 153 grains, the 1-in-8, what's written on the box, seems to stabilize them just fine. Not that we really need to shoot these anyway, and that's one of the things I wanted to make sure we covered. When comparing these two A-tip projectiles, I do think it's going to be a very specialized case where these 153s make sense, at least in 6.5 Creedmoor. We'll put a couple graphs on the screen and hopefully it'll be easy to understand my point. The data that I'm going to present here is just plugging some numbers into Hornady's ballistic calculator on their website. All the values for temperature, humidity, and elevation are all going to be left at whatever the standard value was. Feel free, if you're going to do these numbers, to plug them in to see what makes sense for you. But in this particular case, we're just going for whatever our baseline is going to be for the 135 grain with the velocity we can hit with it versus the 153 grain and what those ballistic tables actually look like. According to Hornady's data, and if we take that, and that's exactly how we ran the calculations, they're saying we're at this 135 grain, we're going to be able to get up to 218.50 feet per second. I really don't think we're going to have any trouble getting there at all. In fact, if we use reloader 26, like we've done with the 135 Classic Hunter, I'm pretty sure 3,000 feet per second might actually be in the cards, but that's another test for another day. 2850 is what we're going to assume is our maximum velocity, as well as for today's video, 2650 seemed like a reasonable velocity to hit with these 153s, and so that's what our numbers will be ran against. So the first chart we're going to put on the screen, just real quick, is a velocity comparison. Our test today is going to run out to 2,000 yards. If you're shooting any further than that, you're going to have to run your own tables. This is just to get an idea or a reasonable comparison between the two projectiles to see which one makes more sense for our purposes. So looking at the velocity, assuming that 200 feet per second gain, because the ballistic coefficient is so good on the 135s, it takes an awfully long time for these to slow down anywhere close to where the 153s are going. And honestly, that doesn't tell the whole story. That's just the velocity. What we really want to understand is talk about the drop and also wind calls. One thing that's important when we look at these numbers, realize that when we look at the wind calls, that those are a 10 mile an hour wind at exactly 90 degrees to the projectile. Again, adjust for your situation. What's really important is the difference between those two. A 10 mile an hour wind at 90 degrees, you're actually not going to be able to see, assuming you're dialing an MOA, you're not going to get a quarter click advantage with the 153s until all the way out to 1,100 yards. So any difference in wind call between these two projectiles, again, you're going to have to go all the way out to 1,100 yards to be able to actually do one less click to correct for your wind call. So as far as wind is concerned, these are very, very close. But let's talk about come up or bullet drop. Again, chart in MOA. We're going to be looking at the come up in MOA, and honestly, it's no contest here whatsoever. All the way out to 2,000 yards, the difference is still almost 4.8 MOA, and the 153 just never catches up. When I say it seems like these 153s have a very, very narrow use case, this is why I say that. If you're shooting anywhere under 1,100 yards, wind call is really not going to get you much of anything at all. And all the way out at 1,100 yards, you're still having to dial 3.5 MOA less with the 135 grain projectile. It just never catches up. The 135 holds that lead all the way through 2,000 and probably far beyond. Maybe in another caliber where it's possible to get the 153s to a much higher velocity, they would make more sense. But overall, these 135s going a possible 3,000 feet per second really seem like the projectile if you're going to pick between these two. Now, when we talk about groups, holy cats, guys, 0.3 MOA with our 4-shot group. This barrel is pretty much wore out, but I still can't complain any way, shape, or form. It's been quite a few tests before we've been able to shoot that small of a group 4-shot. And 4 shots in a row, guys, and that's why I really wished I could show you the video. For this test, we only use Hornady brass. If you guys are a big fan of Hornady brass, I apologize, but it's just not the highest quality brass. This was really only a stabilization test, but the low SD that we hit, the great groups that we shot, I think is a testament a little bit to the powder as well as the projectile in this case, and it really makes me excited to be able to do some more testing whenever we figure out what our new barrel is going to be. So whether we need to actually get a faster twist than 1 1/8, really up in the air unless we really wanted to get these 150s to shoot. Probably the 135s are going to give those 150s a run for their money as well. We're certainly going to be doing some more work with these A-tips on the channel, so if you're interested in that content, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when I post those videos. If you guys are going to be working with these A-tip match projectiles, I do recommend you get the seating stem from Hornady. If there's a good alternative that you guys are aware of, put that in the comment section below. For as inexpensive as the Hornady seating stems are, I certainly would not hesitate to get the micrometer in this case. They seated the bullets really well, and just picking a load at random and shooting that kind of data, I certainly don't have anything to complain about today. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have any comments or questions, please put those in the comment section below. If you're new here and you like the content, hit the subscribe button, turn the bell notification on so you get notified when I post next week's video. I hope to see you back next week, and until then, stay safe in small groups.